seems to have been reserved to the people of this country to decide by their conduct and example to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government through reflection and choice, or are they forever destined to depend upon their political constitutions from accident and force? So wrote Alexander Hamilton in the first Federalist paper, arguing in defense of the federal constitution designed in Philadelphia in 1787. Consider that contrast. Around the world and throughout history, where do people usually get their governments? Not from reflection and choice, but from accident and force. Is it possible, Hamilton asks, that for one time in all of human history, a people might actually choose the government they get instead of just receive it by accident or force? And choose it not so much based on what they think is, what's out for their own self-interest, but what's actually good for themselves. What is conducive to human happiness and flourishing? And of course, how do they pass that on to their kids and their grandkids and their great-grandkids, all the way down to our generation of Americans? The question is still there for us today. Are we capable of establishing, or we might say maintaining, government based on reflection and choice? That depends entirely on our ability to be engaged and serious caretakers of our political system, informed, but also wise and virtuous. It calls on us to be responsible citizens. I'm Professor Kevin Walker, and this is Responsible Citizenship. It meets the core requirement here at University of Mary for the civics component of the core curriculum. Core is, of course, the heart of the university. Every single student takes this series of classes. It's this one, along with the 2 philosophy courses and 2 theology courses and a few others. Because we believe that these are the classes that form the education of a human being, regardless of your major, regardless of whatever specialization you go into. You major in being human first. And so this class is designed to do exactly that for you when it comes to civic participation and politics. This is my first year here. I just started at University of Mary. I'll be in person in the fall. So I will be experimenting a bit with this class, so bear with me. Let's briefly go over this. Actually, first of all, let's consider some data that we have on the way people understand politics today, what they think politics is, and then let's consider what politics really is. Some of the data is not encouraging, as we know. How do you feel talking about politics, right? Even if it's someone who agrees with you, you're a little uncomfortable, right? You'd rather talk, above all, about the weather. That's right at the top of the list. That's very revealing. Weather is easy to talk about. Movies and television, like it's a little narrower. Sports, then you're on a little more dangerous ground, right? The economy, Donald Trump thrown in here just for fun, I guess. Religion is tricky when people, have sort of a meandering way to talk about religion, but something about political conversation. What happens? What does it feel like to talk about politics? It adds a tone to the room that brings a certain level of intensity and discomfort, a feeling that we are not entirely sure that we should be talking about this. Someone always wants to jump in and change the subject to something lighter. Someone always wants to sort of drive home their point, not really caring whether the people in the room share their views. People try to dance around the possible disagreements that may come up. Why does it feel that way? Why doesn't talking about politics feel more like talking about the weather, you wonder? Well, because I think we know deep down, we're talking about something immensely important. We're talking about the common good and what is good for people, the individuals who make up the common good, and questions of human flourishing. And a lot is at stake when we talk about those things and when we pursue those things. So what's so hard about talking about it? Consider this. Just looking at the 2 political parties, more than half of liberal Democrats have stopped talking about political news with someone, just avoid it completely. Republicans appear to be a little more willing to do that. But yeah, we prefer to just kind of shut the conversation down, or at least Democrats do. Republicans are a little more open. In general, though, I mean, all US adults, 45%, I mean, that's almost half, of Americans would like to avoid talking about politics if they can. Consider, too, talking about politics across racial lines, also a source of discomfort. What's interesting, though, more so for white people than Blacks and Hispanics. They're fine talking about race. It's white people that are a little bit uncomfortable about it. And when they do, they sort of fall back into sort of, you might say, a scripted approach to talking about it. So what does this tell us? Why is it so hard to talk about it? Those are friends and neighbors, but let's get a little more intimate. What about people you date? American Enterprise Institute had this data. Those previous polls were from the Pew Research Center, which is very good. But yeah, AEI does some good research on this question too. Who would you date? Young people are more likely to know their partner's political views before they start dating. They'd like to know that they're on the same page politically. A lot of other data shows that people are more concerned about political orientation than religion and a variety of other values. Somehow politics is now the great divide, far, far more than religion ever was, which is quite intriguing. Consider, too, 7 in 10 Democratic daters, that's a fun phrase, Democratic daters, Democrats who date, you should say, would not consider being in a relationship with a Trump voter. So indeed, the divide is very, very apparent. Was it Trump's fault? You could argue partly yes, partly no. I won't get into that, but still, you really see politics as being the great divide between people today. More Democrats, again from AEI, now see political differences as a major problem for romantic relationships. When you think about marriages too, the fact that a bipartisan marriage was once a much more common thing than it is today. It so happens that my wife's grandparents, she's a Republican and he's a Democrat. They've been registered those parties their entire lives since, back in the 40s or whatever. They're very old, and they show no sign of budging in their political views, and yet somehow they work it out. It's not like that anymore. People marry within partisan identity and within ideological lines. Inevitably, what that means is we're not really capable of talking about politics outside of the group that we know. Sorry, the print is a little small in here, but if you ask Americans' participation in civic and political activities, okay, so there's how we talk about politics, but then there's the question of doing politics. Most people are willing to sign a petition because it doesn't really demand much of you other than to support this or that cause. Put your signature on the sheet and be on your way, right? Or not. Down the line, though, the things that tend to matter more, buying something purposefully, like a boycott or something like that. Okay, people are a little more willing to do that, but then it gets narrower and narrower. By the time you get down to contacting an elected official, which seems to be one of the most important things you do in a system of representation, as we'll talk about this semester, fewer people are willing to do that. Down the line, attend a rally or demonstration. You get the impression that lots of people are willing to protest, but really the protesters are a small minority of American society in general. Most people are actually quite uncomfortable joining a protest or a demonstration, even if they agree passionately with what they are protesting. So what do we make of that? Consider, though, the most critical aspect of participation out there, just voting. Why do people not vote? What reasons do they give? As we know, I didn't have a graph for this, but as we know, voting turnout is roughly about 60% of the registered voting population. It goes up and down depending on the election. It's obviously higher for presidential elections than it is for midterms or local elections. 60%, that's kind of low, but then again, do you really want that remaining 40% to vote when they just don't really care? But what about those who don't? What reasons do they give? Number one is an all-American thing to say, I'm too busy. Right? Don't we all say that? Don't we all? Yeah. Too busy. You got to admire the second category, those who are not interested. At least they're honest. They just don't care about politics. I'm not clear if these are registered voters or not, but illness or disability. All right, you're off the hook there. Out of town, okay. Forgot, what's wrong with you? Right? This one makes a little more sense. Dislike the candidates or issues. All right, that's a little more, that makes a little more sense because of just the general disenchantment that people have with politics and with government, with our institutions. Since the 1970s, Vietnam, Pentagon Papers, Watergate, you saw this rapid decline in American confidence in political institutions and practices, and it's never really recovered. So it isn't surprising that a lot of people just don't like the candidates, even if they like the party, even if they agree with the candidates on certain principles. In the end, there's a sort of liking that has to happen for people to actually turn out to vote. And if both the candidates appear to be the same, they're both unlikable sorts, then yeah, voter turnout is pretty abysmal. Registration problems, well, that's an administrative issue. Inconvenient polling places, transportation problems, bad weather. I imagine that happens in North Dakota, but a variety of other reasons people give, personal crises or whatever. Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, what's going on here? Is it really necessary, like we said, for people to care enough to actually get to the polls when they're not exercising their best judgment? Two, what makes for the components of a strong political culture? When is it vibrant? When is it healthy? Well, the one we hear about the most is, of course, civic knowledge. Taking this from chapter 1 of the book. But yeah, civic knowledge. Just because you know a lot about politics, is that all it takes for a strong civic culture? It's a big cottage industry of textbooks, civics today, right? High schools and junior highs. There's a whole bunch of them. And people make a lot of money at them, both the authors as well as the publishers. They're always in demand and they're always marketed with the awareness that people are so unaware of their civic responsibilities and institutions and just basic knowledge of how government works. So what do we do about this? Jimmy Kimmel has his whole comedy sketch where you approach random people on the street and ask them basic questions about the Constitution and government and voting and American political traditions, and people seem to know very little. But is knowledge all there is? Perhaps there's more to it than that. Consider also the necessity of tolerance, the need to tolerate other points of view. It's one thing to know a whole lot about politics, but if you are completely closed-minded to other interpretations, you're not going to have a healthy civic culture. Now, is it possible to know too much about politics? Absolutely. You can be very savvy, you can be smarter than anybody else in the room, and yet not have the right attitude. So too, can you be too tolerant to the point where anything goes? To the point where you confront something that you know is wrong, and yet you don't call it out and you don't treat it as wrong? You stand by your code of tolerance all the way? Indeed. Is it possible for people who see themselves as tolerant to be intolerant? Yep, they sure can. So balancing tolerance with knowledge, though, that gets you somewhere. It's one thing to be tolerant to the point of ignorance. It's another thing to be tolerant, but also informed at the same time. But is that all? Sure, you can have a healthy kind of tolerance and you can have the right knowledge, but in the end, what about whether or not you actually participate? There are all kinds of participation, as you might imagine. Voting, paying taxes being the most obvious sorts, although paying taxes is coercive, but voting at least is voluntary, as it should be. And that's the bedrock of it all. But what about running for office? What about petitioning? Those examples we looked at a minute ago. There has to be the willingness to participate and at least the knowledge of how you get there. Piecing those three things, and yeah, is it possible to participate too much, so much that you ignore the necessity of knowledge or tolerance? Suppose you're fighting for justice. That's a good cause. Do you know what justice is? Have you slowed down to think about it, or do you just assume that your concept of justice is all you need at, all the wisdom of 19 years old or something like that, right? So too, you're a patriot, you're going to save America. Do you know what America is? Have you learned the history? Or do you just kind of have the impressions and you sort of like the flag waving and that sort of thing? No, there needs to be an element of knowledge that informs participation just as much as knowledge that informs tolerance. So what is the most extreme, most dedicated version of participation of all? And it is purely voluntary, even though you see American citizens put their lives on the line. Well, there's an outlier here, and that's, of course, military service. There's just nothing else quite like it. The dedication that you see troops offer their whole lives, and the possibility of dying and, of course, possibility of taking other lives for the sake of their country is extraordinary. We should always measure our degrees of participation, voting, running for office, starting an interest group, protesting, whatever it is. We should always measure those things according to the highest standard of all. And that is, of course, the young men and women who possibly, they definitely offer up their lives for the protection of their country and the possibility of losing their lives for it. Always keep that in mind. As the book points out, what is the glue that holds these three things together? Well, there's two types. There's two things that are very important. One comes easy for us, and that is what's called bonding social capital. That, of course, means hanging out with people who agree with you. That means group solidarity. Consider, campus radicals of the 1960s. Consider the new right on American university campuses today. That's when you are reaffirmed and you dedicate yourself to your group and its cause, and all of that definitely has a place in American politics. But that too has to be balanced with another element that makes that healthy civic culture possible. Along with bonding comes bridging social capital, reaching across the divide, facing people you agree with. Bonding on its own does not ensure that. Bonding is only the first step. Sure, know your group solidarity, know the teachings of your organization and its doctrines and its goals and all of that, but also be willing to listen carefully to the other side. So you can see this is what makes bonding is what makes the participation possible. Bridging is what makes the tolerance possible. And both of those are vital. As we know, we're pretty good at bonding these days, but we're not very good at bridging. And yet we see public figures constantly modeling this for us quite well. And I don't credit these guys with it so much as I credit the political system in which they operate. The Constitution is very well designed, as we'll see, and we'll talk about this later, to bring together opposing points of view. As Oliver Wendell Holmes said, famous Supreme Court Justice, our Constitution is made for people of fundamentally differing views, made for them. And what that means is that there is a difference between ideology and character. They can get mixed up sometimes, but really they are quite different. And pretty much anybody who spent any amount of time in Washington, D.C., or in a state capitol or a city council even will say, yeah, we have fundamentally differing views and different ideas about what ought to be good for the country, good for the state, good for the city, whatever level they serve at. But we're still friends. We still like each other. We still respect each other, not so much for our ideology, we totally disagree with that, but for each other's character. So there you go. This is upsetting to a lot of people, I think, especially those who are much more keen on the bonding aspect, back to that, because they see political officials of opposite views who are kind of political enemies hobnobbing with each other and being friends. Well, hey, they're not doing their jobs. They need to be fighting. They need to be isolating the opposition. They need to be demonizing the opposition. Well, if ideology was all there was, then that would be true, but it's not. Friendship and character is far more fundamental than ideology is. And that is the thing that can really override and make the best of rigid ideology and reestablish the bridging social capital, mix it together well with the bonding social capital, and create a healthy civic culture. Friendship, though. Thomas Jefferson had this reflection in a letter he wrote in 1800, just as he was running for president that November against John Adams, which was a very heated, nasty election. We'll talk about it later. But he said, I never considered a difference of opinion in politics or in religion or in philosophy as a cause for withdrawing from a friend. Wow. Notice who he's writing to here. If you know anything about the backstory, who was William Hamilton? The son of Alexander Hamilton, Jefferson's arch rival. We don't know if Jefferson ever said that specifically to Alexander Hamilton himself, but he did say it to his kid. What a remarkable statement, though. That in a way, all of our profound differences between, about where politics and religion and philosophy and all of these sensitive areas are nonetheless subordinate to our mutual respect that we have for each other as friends. Let's learn in this class and in your life to separate those things out a bit, because the condition that we're in now is pretty bad. Okay, it's one thing if people of opposing parties don't want to marry each other or date each other. Okay, fine. But they can't even be friends? Most partisans, people, Democrats or Republicans, say that they have at least a close friend, a few close friends from the other party. How many say that? It's not looking good. 40% of their own party, 52% of the opposite party say Republicans. Or sorry, some, I should say. Some say they have a lot of close friends, 40% to 52% say some to just a few. What about, sorry, that's their own party. I said that wrong. About their own party, yeah, it's quite a bit narrower. So too with Democrats. They have a lot of friends in their own party, fewer in the opposite party. This is not what we need for political health and stability and a vibrant and flourishing democracy. Consider the last election. Trump voters and Biden voters, right? Same point, that we are very distant from each other when it comes to just friendships. We are unable to see past ideology and partisanship and loyalty to our group. We have tremendous solidarity across the group. Maybe we should learn to look past that and judge character again. Can we judge character though? It's kind of hard when we don't know what it is. We don't think about what virtue means and what it means to our public life. Maybe we should learn to recover that. In the beginning were the Greeks when it comes to politics and political thought. And one of the most important of those Greeks, I'm sure you've met him before, was Aristotle, author of the Nicomachean Ethics, that wonderful book on the good life, on human happiness and virtue. What is a human being for? He wrote a counterpart to that, The Politics, which I assigned for today. Like I said, it's okay if you didn't read it. This is the first class. We'll just kind of go over the first two chapters together. Aristotle taught, though, in general, whatever you're talking about, anything at all, to truly know a thing was to know its four causes. You've probably heard this before because you attend University of Mary, and they're very good on Aristotle. But just to review it, what are the four causes? Well, first of all, you have to know what a thing is made of. That's its material cause. All right, is that it? We know everything about it? Well, obviously not. Material doesn't necessarily make a thing what it is. It's more its form, the formal cause. What is it shaped into? Certain things can only be made of certain materials, true, but still, it's not the material that makes the thing. How does it get that way? How do you take just raw material and form it into something meaningful? Well, that's the efficient cause. But then there's the big, important cause, the most important cause of all, the one that is so important for our understanding of anything we study, really, but politics in this case, and that is the final cause. What is a thing for? You leave that out and you're not really completely understanding what you're studying. And it's sort of, it's a gap in modern political thought, as we'll see, that haunts a great deal of the way we understand the human person. So too in the social sciences in general. Why? What's it for? We don't usually ask that question. Or maybe we answer it very quickly by saying, well, whatever you want. So let's consider a few things. How about a pencil? What is its material cause? Wood, graphite, rubber eraser, metal band that holds the eraser on. That's its stuff. That's where it comes, that's what it's made of, right? What is its formal cause? Well, it has to be shaped into an elongated thing that fits in a human hand, the shape of a pencil. What's its efficient cause? The pencil maker, the company, whatever. It pulls all those raw materials together, and there it is. All right, have you described a pencil completely? Of course not. You're missing the final cause. What is a pencil for? For throwing across the room? You can, but that doesn't explain what the pencil's for. For writing. Consider a chair, classic example. The chair I'm sitting in right now is a bunch of plastic and metal pieces that come together. Material cause. Formal cause. It needs four legs. It needs to be ergonomically comfortable. What is its efficient cause? Well, it's the chair making company that sold it to the university. What's its final cause? Can I stack books on it? Can I, chop it up for firewood? I mean, it's plastic, but whatever. Well, no, what is its final cause? It's for sitting in, right? Wonderful little cartoon explains this quite well. Consider a sculpture. There you see it. What's the material? It's the marble. What's the formal cause? It's the idea of a statue. There's a Greek hoplite. What's the efficient cause? It's the sculptor with his hammer and his chisel. What's the final cause? You can see it written on the shield to be displayed in a temple. What's it for? What's it for? What's it for? That was Aristotle's most fundamental contribution to philosophy in general, I think. It's frequently referred to, if you want to get fancy, as teleology. Telos in Greek means end or purpose, and very much so for politics. Before we get there, though, I mean, what's the four causes of a human being? What are we made of? Flesh, bone, skin, tissue that forms into organs. You can do all the aspects of human physiology right down to molecules. But that's not what we are. What is our formal cause? 2 feet, 2 hands, 2 eyes, head, chest, all the anatomy of a human person. What's an efficient cause? How do we get this way? Well, we have DNA implanted in us that makes us grow into what we are. We pass it on to our ancestor, our descendants. And yeah, the efficient cause. And of course, as we know, Christians have a unique vantage point on this. God is the process in that. So there's something of the final cause in our DNA, true, but there's also something of the final cause in God's hand in growing us into what we are and making us realize too what we are meant for. All right, that's a person. What about a polis? What is a polis? It's often translated as a city-state, and it is exactly that, as it's a sovereign city. It was the most fundamental political order that the Greeks knew, and it was the coming together of every aspect of human life. It was society and economics and religion and just everything deeply knit together. Greek citizens in their cities had a profound sense of belonging. They knew where they belonged. They knew who they were. They were never lost. Being an outcast from a city, that was like worse than being executed for a lot of Greeks. It was extremely painful to lose your city. The word polis is really important too. It's where we get the word for the Greek word anyway, for citizen, polites. There was also politico. That is, of course, a politician, but it literally meant in Greek, the ones who know the things of the city. All those things combined into that single word, the polis. What are the four causes then of a polis? What's the material cause? That's obvious. The people, the citizens. What is the formal cause? The laws that shape the city into what it is. What is the efficient cause? The lawgiver, or maybe the politician in his own way, sort of modifies the pre-existing laws. But yeah, fundamentally it's law. What's the final cause of a city though? What is a polis for? If you've read the ethics in another class, if not, you will, they teach it here. It's human happiness. It's flourishing and prosperity in a spiritual sense, sort of wholeness and completion of what we are meant for. It's the exercise of virtue, the 4 cardinal virtues: moderation, courage, justice, and wisdom. Really, it's this realization of everything a human being is meant for and everything we are. You can't experience your final cause outside of a city. So yeah, 4 causes, very helpful for understanding just about anything you study. You ever feel like a piece is missing, right? In anything you're studying in a class, hey, wait a second, where's that cause? And of course, like I said, the most missing cause of all tends to be the final cause. So what does Aristotle have to say about this in the Politics? You see it there in the first reading in our packet, which you can pull up on Canvas. I strongly encourage you to print it off if you can. I know everybody's got a tight budget. You can print off a few pages at a time if you like, but to really engage a text like this, you kind of need it on paper in front of you. I'll do my best to get some copies in the bookstore before the summer's out, so you can pick one up. But yeah, try to get it on paper if you can. But for today, we'll just look at it together. Chapter 1, on page 2 there. Every city is a community of some kind. Polis, right, is a community of some kind. And every community is established with a view to some good. For mankind always acts in order to obtain that which he thinks is good. He might be mistaken, right? But at least he believes it's good. So that right there is a lot to think about. That is a reference, of course, to the opening as well as the 8th chapter of his book, The Ethics, which, as I mentioned, you'll read at some point. But consider every single human action. It always aims at some good. Why do you do that thing? Whatever it is, right? Well, for the sake of something else. Well, why do you do that? Well, for the sake of something else. Well, why do you do that? Why did I wash my dishes this morning? It's a pretty mundane task. To have dishes to eat on, clean ones. Why I eat? To stay nourished, right? Why stay nourished? To live. Why? At some point, everything terminates at some highest end. But what is that highest end? Aristotle asked. Well, it's happiness. The Greek word was eudaimonia, and the best translation is just happiness. Still, everything else we do is for the sake of some good. But, he says, if all communities aim at some good, the city, the political community, which is the highest one of all, and which embraces all the rest, aims at a good in a greater degree than any other. It aims at the highest good. So, the city, then, that political community, is the thing that sums up all our other aspirations, according to Aristotle. Now, keep in mind, he lived in the 300s BC. This is long before Christianity comes, and as we'll see with St. Augustine, there's a real problem with that. Not a problem, but a challenge to that idea. But for Aristotle, yeah, the city really is the end-all and be-all of human life. Well, what is the city then? Where does it come from? What is its origin? Some people think that the qualification of a statesman, he says, or king or householder, and the master are the same. That, what's the difference between a king of a city and the patriarch of a family? Nothing, some people say. No, they are different, says Aristotle. They deal with very different things. For example, the ruler over a few, well, he's called a master, like a slave owner. Over more, the manager of a household. Over a still larger number, a statesman or a king. As if there were no difference between a great household and a small city. No, it turns out the city is a fundamentally different thing. It's not about the size of the thing. Cities are obviously bigger, but that's not the point. The difference is that a household is governed by, the will of the patriarch and sort of agreement between the parents. But a city, that's different. It's governed by people who make much broader judgments about what is good for a human being and what's good for society, what justice is. So he says it's a mistake. All this is a mistake, he says, to say that any community of people is different. The household, are the same, I meant to say. The household is not political. Might seem that way, but no. A group of friends, not quite the same. No, a large group of people, any community trying to order its life together. That's what politics truly is. That's really striking because we tend to think of politics and we think what? Parties and elections and candidates and stuff you don't talk about over Thanksgiving dinner and things that make you feel awkward, like we said at the beginning. Aristotle just gave us a totally different idea of what politics is. It's just the way a community of people order their lives together. And what's really important about this reading is that Aristotle argues, quite rightly, I think, that it's always with us. Can you ever be truly apolitical? No, you can't. At least not if you're entrusted with figuring things out with the group. Politics is always there. So you might think that you are absolutely apolitical. You have nothing to do with politics. You pay no attention to it. You're just taking this class because you have to, right? Well, as apolitical as you think you are, consider next time you're doing a group project for a class. Consider the next time you're planning a party with a group of people or whatever. You get political. It's always there. It's always with us. So if we're stuck with it, why don't we learn to make the best of it? Why don't we learn to see what vibrant, healthy, happy politics looks like? Chapter 2, back to the origin question, now that he's given a distinct, separate idea for what a political community is compared to any other. Where do they come from? What's the origin? And here he takes you through this fascinating series of steps. He who thus considers things in their first growth and origin, by the way, the Greek word for origin is physis, spelled P-H-Y-S-I-S. We get the word physics, means birth, that's origin, right? Whether a city or anything else will obtain the clearest view of them. In the first place, there must be a union of those who cannot exist without each other. And who's that? Male and female. I love this picture of Odysseus and Penelope after he returns from his voyages. Marriage is the first step. It is the first union that really has no explanation to it. And it's kind of a nod to the deep mysteries of erotic love. What is it like to be in love? You know, whether you're married or not, what is it like to be in that sort of rapturous awe of someone else and see something in them that completes your lost wholeness, that somehow is the perfection of everything you desire? But of course, it isn't. Christianity is a real challenge to that notion, as we'll see. But, you know, it's still, though, it's what it feels like, isn't it? Aristotle says, I can't explain it. It's just like a law of magnetism. Man and woman come together and boom, they get married, male and female, so that the race may continue. And so they produce offspring and children. We get very few images in the classical world of Greek households. Here's one of the very few, though. There are the parents, and there's all the kids, right? Gathered around the family hearth in memory of the family ancestors. How does all this happen? Aristotle says. Well, it all happens naturally. No surprise. It's just like a law of gravitation. Like attracts like. You know, he says this in the way he describes other things. So too, man and woman come together, and along come children. And it's a natural thing. And it leads inevitably to a broader community. Once you have enough families, and once you have, you know, siblings who marry their spouses, and you end up with a village, you're drifting closer and closer toward a city. So that's it. It's the natural progression of things. Now, it's really important to notice as you look at this passage, he does not mean this happens historically. So it's not like somewhere in the distant past, right? There was man and woman who got together. You know, he had no concept of Adam and Eve, you know, as we would think, as we see it in the Bible. No, it happens all the time. There are always marriages happening. There are always families. There are always cousins knit together that form the village, that form the city. And it's sort of he thought of things very vertically. He didn't think of things historically. He looked at history as a cyclical thing. It kind of happens over and over and over again. It's not linear. History is not going anywhere. Human development is just sort of happening right in front of you. You know, the same way a tree grows, the same way a puppy grows into a dog, the same way, you know, anything. So too, cities have this sort of natural, organic kind of growth. And several of those villages of extended families, right, band together into a single complete community large enough to be nearly or quite self-sufficing. The city comes into existence, he says, originating in the bare needs of life, true, their survival, but continuing its existence for the sake of a good life. So this notion that we come together into political communities to survive, for security, to protect our property or whatever, Aristotle had no concept of that. Yeah, there are advantages to the community, sure, but that's not the point. We come together for the good life, for happiness, as we said before. And therefore, if the earlier forms of society are natural, so is the city, right? The city is just as natural as marriage is. It's all connected. Marriage is just the seed, you might say. The city is the fully grown tree. For what each thing is, when fully developed, we call its nature. And there you don't see it, but in the Greek, he uses a different word for nature. The first one was physis, meaning birth. Here he says telos. That's the final cause, like we saw in the four causes a second ago. Yeah, if the earlier forms of society are natural, yeah, that's right. For what each thing is when fully developed, we call its nature, its telos. Whether we are speaking of a man, a horse, a family, anything, the final cause, right? Because the final cause and end of a thing is the best, and to be self-sufficing is the end and the best. So it's evident, next paragraph, that the city is a creation of nature. and that man is by nature a political animal. Political animal. And the Greek in that is wonderful. It's zoon politikon, right? Zoon is animal, politica. We're political animals. Well, what makes us different then from other animals that are gregarious? A herd of sheep, a swarm of bees. Well, we need our communities in a different sort of way than they do. They do it to survive. We do it to flourish in a much deeper sense. Without it, without that political community, what happens to us? He says, and he who by nature and not by mere accident is without a city, he's not a bad man. Or sorry, he's either a bad man, sorry, said that wrong, like a criminal, or he's above humanity. He's tribeless, lawless, and hearthless, as Homer said in the Odyssey. The natural outcast is forthwith a lover of war. He's a monster, he's a dangerous person. He may be compared to the isolated pieces of droughts in a board game that the Greeks would play. Now, that man is more of a political animal than the bees or any other gregarious animal is evident. Nature, as we often say, makes nothing in vain, and man is the only animal whom she has endowed with the gift of speech. That could easily be translated as reason, too, because the Greek word for speech and reason was the same, logos. And whereas mere voice is but an indication of pleasure and pain, which is what animals do, and is therefore found in other animals, for their nature attains to the perception of pleasure and pain and imitation of them to one another, but no further, the power of speech is intended to set forth the expedient and inexpedient, right and wrong, just and unjust. We find out, of course, that animals really do communicate with each other quite a bit more than we realized in ways that are really quite fascinating. Whale calls, and there's all kinds of studies on this. But still, there's nothing to conclude there that they deliberate about right and wrong. They get angry with each other, but they don't hold grudges, right? We do, human beings do, because we constantly think of a sense of justice, right? It's not that someone hurt me, it's that my honor was wounded. You'll see two dogs get into a fight, and then 5 seconds later, they'll be playing with each other. But humans don't do that. Our fights have significance, they have meaning. It takes us a while to get over it. That's very revealing about the kinds of creatures that we are. We truly are the political animal. No other species is political the way we are. So it's characteristic of a man that he alone has any sense of good and evil, and just and unjust and the like. And the association of living beings who have this sense makes a family and a city. So, political by nature. What a remarkable insight that Aristotle offers here. If that's true, like we said, there's no getting away from it. We are always, always political. So to sum up for today, by the way, I didn't mention this in the syllabus. I had these questions in the column next to the readings. And they're just kind of general questions to think about as you read, very general. But at the end of each class, I'll just kind of go over them. Here's the least you should know. What is the problem of civic education today? And what should it be instead? Well, there's that triad. We often think that civic education is entirely a matter of knowledge. Knowledge is immensely important, right? You got to be civically and historically literate, true. But there's also attitude. There's also a willingness to be tolerant. Again, not tolerant in the sense that you just are a relativist and you equate all values, but tolerant in the sense that you're willing to listen and weigh the merits of opposing points of view. That's real politics when it's healthy and vibrant. Of course, mixed together with participation, a willingness to actually do something, at least vote, at least show up at the polling place. What does politics actually mean? It's not what we think it is. It's not parties and campaigns and elections and candidates and, that's the uniquely American way of politics. Politics is nothing more than the art of how a community of people orders their lives together. And it's an art, right? Not a science. Political science is a wonderful study, but the art has to be practiced in order to be done well. If you fall out of practice, you're not going to be very good at it. If you do practice it, though, you will be a major contributor to a vibrant and flourishing political order. Politics is that, just how a community orders its life together. What makes something political or non-political, as Aristotle addressed? Well, When you're talking about non-political things, you're just kind of stating facts. So it's back to the graph where people are talking about the weather and sports, and there you're just describing things. Cold one today, right? No one's saying it ought to be warmer today. It's a matter of imperative, right? My team lost. No one's saying my team should have won. You put it that way, I guess, but we know what we mean. Politics is different, and it has a unique intensity to it, because what are we saying? It is how things ought to be. It's what's just and good for human beings. And that's a whole different category of questions and concerns than what we usually have. So like I said, I'm thrilled to teach all of you this semester and talk about these things. And I hope to have as much interaction with you as I can, even though the class is asynchronous. So be sure to email me or watch for the questions on the discussion board. I'll have the I'll have the question list up shortly, and you can put your name on the sign up sheet. And there's, like I said, there's some instructions on it that you can refer to. Anything's confusing or unclear, definitely let me know. And I will see you all, or I guess you'll see me tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.